Undercover boss gets coffee and toast at Coffeehouse stops cold when tip policy leaves staff hungry. 12:03 p.m. Willow Glen, a small town off the highway where summer arrives earlier and harsher than most places in the state. The scorching sun blazed down on the faded tile roofs of old shops. Across the street, the clock above the locksmith's door ticked forward to the third minute, signaling that noon had arrived and something was about to happen. The Calf Corner Dawn Calf, one of the earliest branches of the New Dawn chain, still looked modest beige-painted wooden signage, a few pots of dried lavender hanging by the door, the soft chime of a bell ringing every time someone stepped inside. And this time the door opened for a middle-aged man. He entered slowly, shirt wrinkled at the shoulders, wearing a light gray faded jacket. His shoes were scuffed at the heels, dusty from the road. On his head, a dark blue cap, no logo, no special markings, just something to cover his salt and pepper hair. No one turned around. No one noticed. But if anyone had paid closer attention, they might have recognized those eyes, the same ones that once appeared on the cover of Forbes in interviews titled "The Man Who Built New Dawn from Nothing." Michael Foster, age 50 founder of the Calf chain, now present in 12 states across America, was here today not as a CEO. He was here to listen, to observe, and to verify. Because just 1 week ago, the head office received 2 anonymous letters. One from a barista, one from a former customer. Both mentioned a strange new policy at the Willow Glen branch, a tip-sharing structure where the person directly serving customers received less than half. The second letter included one sentence Michael couldn't ignore: at Corner Dawn Calf, kindness no longer seems to be on the menu. Michael didn't send a regional manager. He didn't make a video call. Instead, he came alone, unannounced. No name, no assistant. Because sometimes only when the CEO stops being the CEO does the truth come out unfiltered by fear or choreographed scenes. The wooden door closed softly behind him as he glanced around the calf. To the left, the barista counter where a young woman was steaming milk. To the right, 3 empty tables, sunlight pouring through the large front window, highlighted the wood grain and a few dried coffee stains. The warm scents of cinnamon and baked butter mixed with the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee, a fragrance that should have made the place feel cozy and inviting. And then, "Excuse me, sir," a woman's voice spoke. Not loud, not harsh, but missing the kindness one might expect for a stranger. Michael looked up. A woman in her 40s, hair tied in a tight bun, wearing a name tag, Linda Morris, shift manager. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, judging his modest clothes, before she lowered her voice now, colder. "Sorry, sir, this section is for regulars only. You'll have to take a seat near the service counter." She pointed toward the back, where 2 small tables sat beside the restroom door, dimly lit by a flickering yellow bulb. Michael kept a calm gaze. He didn't respond. He simply looked toward the window side table, the very place he had sat 8 years ago while drafting the first ever menu for Corner Dawn. The same spot where he'd once written the slogan, "A small place to start a big day." And today he was no longer welcome to sit in the place where his dream first took shape. Linda frowned, seeming irritated by his silence. She repeated more firmly this time, "That section is for locals. We keep it free for familiar faces. You can sit over there." Inside the calf, a few glances flicked in his direction but quickly turned away. No one said a word. No one questioned it. Michael gave a slight nod. No argument, no pushback, just silence. He walked toward the table near the counter, pulled out the chair, set his cap down, and opened the menu. A soft breath, a slight furrow of the brow, but it all passed in a moment. Because he didn't come here to be served like a special guest. He came to witness the very indifference that his own system might be silently condoning. At the bar, a young staff member, around 19, silver-dyed tips, whispered to the coworker beside him, "Who's that looks weird?" The other chuckled dryly, "Probably just some bored old guy. From the looks of him, doubt he'll leave much of a tip." The words reached Michael's ears. He didn't turn around. He simply flipped to the next page of the menu. Inside him, a realization was quietly forming,
Something had changed.
and not in the way he had hoped. Not every branch had preserved the spirit of New Dawn. Not everyone wearing the apron understood why this calf existed in the first place, and today he needed to make that clear, not through power, but through presence. The ceiling fan above rotated slowly, but not enough to dispel the heaviness seeping into the corners of the calf. Linda Morris, morning shift manager, returned with a tray of napkins, but her gaze was not on her task. It locked straight onto the man sitting near the counter, brow slightly furrowed, as if his silent presence disrupted the rhythm of the calf itself. She tilted her head, voice still carrying the rehearsed politeness of hospitality, but beneath it was an unmistakable impatience. If you're not going to order soon, please free up the table. This area is usually reserved for our lunchtime regulars. Michael looked up, his eyes still the same calm, deep, and steady, but this time something quiet stirred within. He didn't argue. He didn't falter. He didn't explain. He simply scanned the calf, 3 empty tables, a few customers tapping on their phones, a staff member wiping the bar, and a group chatting in the back, no one paying attention. No one intervened. No one asked why. And no one, not even Linda, suspected that this man was the very founder of the place they were working in. Michael gave a faint nod. His voice was low but carried weight from within. I just need a menu. That was it. A simple request. Humble, unassuming. But the way Linda looked up furrowed her brows and shot a glance toward the bar like she'd just been inconvenienced by an unwelcome customer said far more than any accusation could. At the bar, the curly-haired brunette barista, her name tag read Sophie, glanced over. She saw it all. The look of disdain, and the man's complete calmness in response. There was a flicker of hesitation in Sophie's eyes, but then she turned away. Because she was only a part-time employee. Every hour she worked meant 1 bowl of instant noodles at night. She couldn't afford to speak up. Linda placed the menu on the table with more force than necessary. Thud. The plastic binder hitting the table was a small sound, but it rang cold like the action itself. If you need anything, just call. I have other customers to attend to. She turned and walked away, heels striking the wooden floor in firm, echoing steps. Michael placed his hand on the menu and opened it. His finger paused on a familiar line-light breakfast with honey toast and black coffee. A recipe he himself created 8 years ago when the calf was still just a dream on paper. That dream was now being served like a burden. A whisper came from the group of staff standing in the corner. Look at him. Dressed like a drifter and wants the window seat. Probably just some walk-in. Nobody knows him. Michael heard it. Loud and clear, but he didn't react. Because he knew everything unfolding in front of him was real. No one pretends in front of someone they think doesn't matter. And that made every expression, every attitude, every whispered remark more valuable than any internal report he had ever received. At the next table, a middle-aged couple had just gotten their drinks. The man glanced over at Michael's table, then shook his head gently. They're going too far this time. I've seen that man somewhere before. The woman whispered, leave it. They don't like outsiders. And there's nothing we can do. Her words only deepened the heavy air within the calf. Everyone could see it, but no one wanted to intervene. Michael lifted the glass of water already on the table and brought it to his lips. Cold. No ice. No lemon. But he drank it, as if that very chill was necessary to jolt him awake from the illusion that every branch still carried the soul he had poured into building. And in that exact moment, the satisfaction factor clicked into place, because the audience no longer saw a boastful CEO pretending to be humble. They saw a founder quietly wounded by his own system. They saw a father returning to the house he built and not being recognized. They saw the truth, unpolished and untheatrical, but deeply human. And somewhere in the audience, a question began to form. If I were a guest at that calf, would I have stood up? Michael placed the menu down on the table. He didn't need more time. He had seen enough. And from this point on, the story would no longer be about a regular lunch. It would become a lesson for every staff member, every manager, and for all the viewers watching each word, each action unfold. Because sometimes conflict doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with a seemingly harmless sentence: if you're not ordering, please give up the table. The cafe's ambient noise carried on as if nothing had happened. The coffee grinder whirred. Cups clinked. The ceiling fan hummed gently above. But amid it all, something had shifted. A quiet undercurrent was building beneath the calm facade. Ben, the young male server just over 20, approached. He didn't bring a notepad. He didn't bring a menu. Only a worn tablecloth in hand, slightly discolored from overuse. But his eyes were sharp, scrutinizing, defensive, and visibly tired. Ben stopped in front of Michael's table. He leaned slightly forward, not in interest, but in quiet suspicion. "We don't serve unless you order something specific." His voice was flat, but each word was pressed with just enough weight to put pressure on the man before him. "People like you usually just sit and leave. That hurts our numbers." A moment of silence. Michael looked up. His eyes remained unchanged, deep still like a calm lake beneath a brewing storm. But this time something shimmered, not anger, but a quiet disappointment that reached the depths of his soul. He replied softly, "I'm still waiting for a menu." Just one sentence. Nothing more. But those words, spoken by a man who once opened his very first cafe with his own 2 hands, who once taught his staff to brew coffee as an act of hospitality, suddenly carried the weight of something broken. Ben blinked. There was something about this old man that made him uneasy. Maybe it was the calmness. Or maybe it was the way he didn't lower his eyes like most nameless customers. "Could you bring me a menu?" Michael repeated, his voice steady. But Ben didn't answer. He turned and walked away. From the back, Linda was watching. She saw that look. But she didn't intervene. The cafe was still full. The sales still flowed. To Linda, some strange old man wasn't worth her concern. At a corner of the cafe where sunlight glowed against the walls, Sophie, the young barista, quietly witnessed the scene from behind the espresso machine. She stared at the foaming cappuccino, but her ears could not ignore what they'd just heard. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the cup on a tray. Though only 21, she was no stranger to this kind of treatment. But this time, something felt different. That man hadn't demanded anything, nor had he silently endured. He was simply patiently waiting for the bare minimum of respect. At a nearby table, an elderly woman with dark skin in a deep-colored sweater furrowed her brow and glanced over. She pulled her purse a little closer and sighed a long breath as if it carried a lifetime of witnessing this kind of subtle discrimination. But she said nothing, because in this cafe speaking up often meant never being welcomed back. Michael sat still, his hand resting on the worn wooden table. He gently ran his fingers along its surface, feeling every tiny scratch, remembering how he once personally chose every wood grain, every chair. What had his dream been? A place where anyone who walked in, whether a CEO or a mail carrier, would be greeted with a smile and a hot cup of coffee. But now, this cafe had become the very opposite of the spirit he once planted. The door chime rang as new customers entered.
Staff rushed to greet them.
Ben passed by Michael again without looking back. Linda smiled at the newcomers, her gaze toward Michael unchanged. And then a small thing happened. Sophie left the bar. She carried a menu. Saying nothing, she placed it on Michael's table and added a gentle whisper, "I'm sorry for the delay." Michael looked up, offering a faint smile. In that moment, the sunlight through the window seemed warmer. Every background sound seemed to fade. That one gesture, so small, became the first shift in the air.
Sophie didn't turn away after placing the menu.
Her heart was pounding, but her eyes didn't waver. For the first time that day, someone chose not to pretend nothing had happened. Michael tilted his head slightly. He didn't say, "Thank you," out of habit. Instead, he spoke through his eyes as if to tell her something that words could never fully express. "You just did the right thing. And I'm grateful for that." In that fleeting moment, It was as if the entire caf blurred into the background, leaving only the two of them, a silent customer and a young barista, both standing on the side of what is right. Sophie bit her lip, lightly still gripping the serving tray in her hand. Then she turned and slowly walked back toward the counter, but it wasn't a retreat. It was the beginning of a decision forming inside her. She no longer wanted to just stand behind the espresso machine doing her job. She wanted to do something that would truly change this caf. Michael opened the menu. His eyes skimmed the items not to choose, but to hide a rising wave of emotion that had just awakened. How long had it been since the last time he witnessed true humanity emerge in a place run by numbers and cold keys behind the bar? Sophie lowered her head, opening a small drawer, the place where she kept customer receipts no one read and handwritten notes left behind by a few guests. Thank you for the best cappuccino I've had all week. You're the reason I come back here every morning.
She took out another piece of paper, a note from her father, who once told her, if you can't change the system, start with one person.
Sophie lifted her gaze. Her eyes no longer wavered. At that moment, Linda passed by the bar. Get back to work, Sophie. Her voice was colder than the chill of the ice cream freezer.
Sophie didn't respond right away.
She looked at Linda for a long time. And for the first time, she replied, not with silence, but with a short question sharper than defiance. You think a customer doesn't deserve respect just because he's not a regular? Linda frowned, unable to answer. But Sophie's gaze did not flinch. Without waiting for a reply, she left the counter and grabbed another cup. She began preparing a drink for the only man who had waited 13 minutes for a menu without once getting angry. At the table, Michael saw it all, not with his ears, but through instinct. He saw how Sophie stood taller, how she didn't turn away. And he understood, before a system can change, someone has to act first.
Sophie returned.
This time in her hand was a latte even foam with a delicate leaf design drawn on the surface. No one had asked for it. No one was going to charge for it. She placed the cup down and bowed her head slightly. I thought you might need a warm latte to start your quiet afternoon. Michael said nothing. He simply lifted the cup, feeling the warmth travel from his fingers all the way to the center of his chest. Inside that unnamed cup of coffee was more than just steamed milk and espresso. There was a quiet belief that kindness, though suppressed, could still rise like a seed waiting patiently to bloom. And in that caf, at that exact moment, no one knew what they had just witnessed. But Michael knew, I've just found the first person I need to keep. Michael didn't need to get angry, didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to slam the table. Just a small gesture, he reached into his coat pocket for his phone. No one noticed at first. They thought he was just another customer preparing to leave. But Sophie, standing nearby, felt something different. A stillness that didn't come from resignation, but from the calm right before the storm. Michael dialed a number. Just one sentence. His voice was low, steady, and free of any personal emotion, yet it sent chills down Sophie's spine. Karen, initiate Protocol 7. Nothing more. No explanation. No need for justification. A decisive female voice on the other end responded, ready. The order is in motion. Michael hung up. The room fell silent. No more laughter. No one knew what Protocol 7 meant, but instinct told everyone this was no trivial matter. He stood up, walked toward Linda, the morning shift manager, the same person who once said this area is for regulars only. Now she was the one unfamiliar with the weight of that gaze. It wasn't angry. It wasn't resentful. It was the look of someone who knows the entire truth and still lets you choose your own downfall. Michael stopped in front of her. No unnecessary space between them. No room left for Linda to retreat, not in dignity nor in responsibility. His voice rang out. Not loud. But every single person heard every single word. I am Michael Foster, founder of the New Dawn Calf chain. He paused for one beat. And this is my store. Dead silence. The entire room froze. Sophie stood motionless. The elderly woman in the corner lowered her cup. A young customer near the entrance stopped chewing her half-eaten toast. And Linda, she stood there paralyzed. Her arms hung limp, unsure where to rest. She looked at Michael as if he were a stranger, not because he was unfamiliar, but because she had never imagined that the old man could be the one with the power to unravel everything with just one sentence. Joe, the waiter from earlier, took a step back, eyes wide with panic. He stammered, I didn't know we were just following the rules. Michael looked directly at him. Not harsh. Not accusatory. Just one question: what rule allows you to belittle someone waiting for a menu? Another customer, the middle-aged man who had looked away earlier, now bowed his head. Sophie clenched her apron. Her eyes glistened. Not from fear, but from overwhelming relief. Because finally, someone had said the right thing. And not just said it, but had the power to change the entire system. Michael walked back toward his table, but he did not sit down. He stood there next to the still warm latte, and spoke not to Linda, not to Joe, but to everyone in the room. This cafe was built to be the first place you feel welcome each morning. Not to draw lines between regulars and strangers. Not to make someone wait 13 minutes just for a menu. I can forgive mistakes in service, but I will never overlook the lack of human respect. A chair scraped softly in the distance. A customer stood up and began to clap. Then another, and another. Not fast, not loud, but enough for the sound to become a voice, one that finally spoke the truth no one dared say aloud all this time. Linda bowed her head. She said nothing, because she knew any excuse now would be too late. The glass door gently pushed open. The familiar bell chimed again, but this time no one turned to look out of habit. Because every gaze in the room was now fixed on a man walking in, dressed in a black shirt, wearing a gold staff badge. Sophie saw him first. She took a step back, fingers tightening on the edge of the counter. Not from fear, but because she knew that golden badge belonged to one group, only the special oversight team from New Dawn. The man said nothing. He simply nodded at Michael, then pulled a stamped document from his briefcase and placed it on a nearby table. Temporary suspension order for this branch. Everything stopped. Linda looked up, lips trembling. Joe stammered. Some customers glanced at each other, unsure if they'd just heard right. Michael remained still, as if he had known this exact moment would come. The inspector didn't pause. He continued under Protocol 7. All morning shift staff of Branch 4, including manager, wait staff, and cashier, will be subject to independent review within the next 24 hours. Branch operations are suspended for 48 hours for internal audit and comprehensive retraining. All salaries and bonuses during the investigation will be withheld unless positive feedback is recorded from verified customer surveys. No one argued. No one apologized. Because in this moment, the truth was no longer in the hands of those who once believed they held control. Linda trembled for a while before finally pulling out her phone. She called the coordination office for the first time on her shift, not to report smooth operations, but to await disciplinary action. Sophie slowly stepped out from behind the counter. She stood beside Michael. She said nothing, just looked at him. Michael looked back, gave a quiet nod. Thank you for the menu, he said softly. Sophie bit her lip, holding back the emotions rising in her throat. An elderly customer pulled out his phone and opened the camera. Not to post it online, but because he knew this was one of those rare moments when justice stood present, clear and without any need for drama. Michael didn't need to add anything more. He simply stepped back, leaving the space before him open like a final warning. His voice was low measured, each word landing with precision. All morning shift staff at this branch are hereby suspended effective immediately pending investigation for discriminatory conduct and violation of the core values of our system. A heavy silence. No one could speak. Then the sound of the door opening echoed softly behind him, yet it carried like a signal of change. 3 people entered. Leading them was Emily Park, Director of Human Resources for the entire New Dawn system. Her hair tied neatly, a thick file in hand sealed with a red stamp. Behind her followed 2 HR specialists in pale gray uniforms, neutral in tone, but heavy with the weight of authority. Emily asked no questions. She walked straight to the counter, set the file down on the wooden surface, and opened the first page. 3 names stood out in bold red ink: Linda Morris, Ben Houston, Joseph Kelly. She spoke one sentence as clear and sharp as an official directive: this branch will close for 48 hours. All internal operations are now transferred to the Special Investigation Team. You are requested to step off your shift and sign the temporary suspension order. Linda staggered slightly. Her hand reached for the counter, but there was nothing to hold on to. Not because anyone pushed her, but because the truth had stripped away every excuse she once relied on. Ben turned to Joe, but the co-worker who had laughed with him just 20 minutes ago now stared silently at the tiled floor as if hiding from his own shadow. Michael slowly walked toward the counter. He didn't need to assert authority because at this moment his power came not from title but from the trust being restored. He stopped in front of Sophie, looked at her for a long moment, then turned to the entire CAF. I will personally retrain the staff at this branch, he said. The sentence hung in the air.
Some looked on waiting.
And then he added slowly, laying each word like fresh foundation, not because they don't know how to make coffee, but because they've forgotten how to look someone in the eye without judgment. A quiet breath was drawn. It came from Sophie.
She wiped the corner of her eye, then nodded a small gesture, but enough to break the chill that had filled the room.
In the back corner, the elderly woman in the purple sweater gently folded her napkin and placed it on the table. By the window, the man who once ignored it all now turned toward Michael and gave him a nod, a silent apology. Emily turned to the next page of the file. We are also launching the anonymous feedback process for customers of this branch. Every comment will be recorded and may influence the reinstatement of employment contracts. Joe's face turned pale. Ben swallowed hard. Linda let go of the counter, and now she had nothing left to cling to except silence. And then, like a final move, quiet but sharp, Michael walked toward the front door. Before leaving, he turned around, his eyes still deep, just as they had been when he first stepped in. New Dawn was never built to become the biggest calf chain. It was meant to be the smallest place that still keeps its soul. A soft breeze drifted in through the open door. And in that moment, you could feel something shift in the air. The atmosphere felt lighter. The tables and chairs no longer just seating, they became a space to welcome back decency. Sophie looked at the door that had just closed behind Michael. One beat, then another, she removed her apron. No one asked her to. No one gave an order. But every gaze turned toward her, not with suspicion, but expectation. Sophie slowly walked toward the counter where Linda still stood pale-faced. The young woman placed her hand gently on the folder Emily had just closed. She turned to the HR team, her voice calm. I've worked here the longest after Linda. If someone's needed to assist with the investigation and help bridge communication with customers, I volunteer to stay. Emily looked at her directly, unblinking. Then, after a few seconds, she nodded very slightly. You will be the point of contact. Acting representative of store operations for now. No one said a word, but everyone could feel it. A person who had once stayed silent was now standing up not to protect someone, but to protect the very values that were on the verge of collapse. Linda's shoulders slumped, her eyes vacant. She knew in that moment control had left her hands for good. Ben quietly walked away without a word. Joe remained frozen in place, still not ready to leave the stale air he had gotten used to. Emily turned, pulled out a short-term operations plan, tomorrow 8 a.m. The investigation team will hold a customer meeting here. Sophie, prepare a preliminary questionnaire. I'll send you the survey template. Sophie nodded. She reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out a pen, an old one, but still with ink. No one noticed it, but it was the same pen she used every morning to jot down orders, sometimes clipping a thank you note to the receipt. Now it would be the tool used to write a new chapter. In the back of the CAF, the young man who had earlier paused mid-bite stood up and stepped forward. He left a folded cash bill on the table along with a scribbled message on a napkin. For the first time I've seen a CAF apologize with action. He bowed slightly toward Sophie, then walked out without waiting for change. Sophie picked up the napkin, read it. A very small smile appeared on her lips. Not out of pride, but because finally kindness had begun to return without fanfare, without trumpets. Michael had just touched the door handle when a soft voice called out from behind. Not loud, not urgent, but enough to bring the entire calf to a halt.
Sir, he turned.
It was Sophie.
She stood behind the counter, both hands gently gripping her apron.
Her eyes were red, but not from fear. It was the courage she had just found within herself. I've worked here for 3 months, but with the current tip-sharing policy, I barely have $30 left at the end of each week. She swallowed, hard voice trembling last week. I had to choose between buying a textbook or buying rice. I chose the book, so I lived on instant noodles all week. Michael didn't respond right away. He stepped forward again, each step not heavy with anger, but with the weight of a truth long left unspoken.
Sophie lowered her head, almost wishing she could disappear.
But then he stopped in front of her, his gaze no longer stern but warm and calm, like a morning without coffee but full of light. Tomorrow, Sophie, you will be the first person in our retraining class. She looked up, her eyes uncertain. Michael nodded gently. No one should have to choose between knowledge and food. No one should have to learn survival in a place that was meant to help them grow. You are not a part-time worker. You are the future of this place if we still remember how to listen. A pause. Then a single clap. Slow, very slow, but steady. It was the elderly woman in the corner, the one who had remained silent all along. Another person stood up and clapped. Then another. Within 10 seconds, the entire calf awakened not because someone had been suspended, but because something true had just been said. And someone had been brave enough to hear it. Michael turned, walking toward the door. As he opened it, a breeze of early summer drifted in. On the table near the window, an old menu fluttered upward, spinning once before landing on the floor like a silent farewell. A chapter defined by categories, cold stares, and heartless rules had just been wrapped up in that single spin of paper. Fairness does not live in slogans pinned to walls. It lives in how you treat the most vulnerable person on an ordinary workday. A true CEO does not measure success with numbers, but with the soundness of sleep, their staff enjoys knowing they'll never have to choose between dinner and their college dreams. Change does not come from outrage. It comes from someone brave enough to stand up and someone calm enough to listen. Michael Foster is not a savior. He is simply someone who still remembers why he built this place. And today, he gave no commands. He only reminded everyone that kindness doesn't need a budget. It only needs your choice not to stay silent.